out again anew for the person. But that's been very slow coming. So we go through a futures planning process so that we can get a bunch of things. We can get a long-term plan for changing people's service, for changing services for lots of people, not just the person. A service plan that can be implemented now that will hopefully increase the quality of the person's life and help with the behavior problems is one of the reasons the person even came to us. And obviously it has to include a teaching plan. Now, I'm going to go into this in a little bit of detail, not because I expect that you're going to go do futures planning. I don't know your jobs that way. I want you to just simply understand it as a concept and the thinking behind it and how you can incorporate at least parts of it in terms of the planning process that you're involved in. The planning process that you're involved in that comes as close to it is the first plan, the individual service plan. Futures planning was developed by a lot of other people, including us, John O'Brien, Beth Mount, Jack Peeler. A lot of people on the West Coast call them individual service designs. It was done out of recognition that for lots of people, the formal planning process doesn't work well, or at least hasn't up till now. And a recognition that for Ralph, more of the same is probably not the answer. And the facts are, while no one wants the process to work that way, and it doesn't have to, the reality is what you get out of most plans is more of what you had in the past. There's some studies done that show up to 90% of my plan was on my last plan. And I'll go through some comparisons of this kind of thinking versus traditional planning in a minute. But we use it very selectively. We use personal futures planning. We recommend it when a group of people who really know a person and really care about the person say, maybe we need to drastically look at what we're doing, and maybe we need to alter a lot of what we're doing. And we don't need to for Mary. Things are going well for Mary. Maybe they could be better. But this guy bothers us, and the more we think about it, the more we conclude that it probably is a matter of more than just doing things consistently, getting more of this, another one-to-one. We may need to really rethink things. Those are the circumstances under which we recommend people to go through this thinking. Now, we would recommend, and what I hope the most of what you would get out of this morning's talk about this is, there are a lot of ideas within futures planning that we should incorporate in all of our planning and the thinking process and some of the steps. But, like, for instance, the guy that taught me the most early on about it was a guy named Jim, who had been kicked out of the workshop for the third time. That's how he got into the project. When they picked their 5 people, they picked 5, and then someone thought, Jim. So they eliminated somebody and they stuck Jim in because Jim had been kicked out of the workshop for the third time. He had lived at one of the state institutions. He had moved to a group home. He was very happy there. He caused trouble there, but he was very happy there. And he hated the workshop, and he showed it 3 different times. They brought him in. He would work for a while, but the whole time he would say, no workshop, leave, no workshop. And they'd smile, redirect him. And finally, he would beat up somebody bad enough, and he would be beaten up in the process, that they would expel him. And then they waited about a year, and brought him back a second time. Same thing happened again. They waited about a year and a half. They brought him back the third time, and he had just been kicked out after the third time when we found him. We did a futures plan with Jim, and Jim's futures plan, in terms of a better, brighter future for him daytime, calls for him to work in a small setting around cars with no other disabled people. The adult services director for that county came out of the meeting and said, Wade, this is crazy. And I thought she was going to say it's silly, it's really imperfect. She said, Jim has a better, more positive plan now than anybody in the workshop. All the people that have been making it in the workshop. And I thought she was going to say, that's ridiculous because Jim is so much more handicapped. She said, we ought to do this with everybody. If we can think this positively about Jim, given the trouble he's had, once we think in terms of him and his life, We should do it for everyone. Well, we discouraged her because you can't do it for everybody. She only has so much energy. Jim, we went to the second meeting to try to now start talking about how to implement this. And one of the women turned to Jim and said, Jim, I'm sorry for what I did to you. And Jim, he understands almost everything, but he obviously couldn't understand that. Wasn't clear. And he looked at her kind of funny, and she said, I should have never made you try to package things. And I couldn't put it down, so I turned to her and I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, I mean, now that I see the futures planning, when we think about what we said about Jim, there was nothing ever in his life that said he was going to like that or could tolerate it or would succeed at it. I mean, his living room, his room in the group home is covered literally floor to ceiling with pictures of cars and trucks. He has models of cars and trucks. He buys clothes because he will only buy clothes that look like uniforms because he saw somebody in a car wash that had a uniform one time. Everybody he sees around cars is always wearing a uniform, so he has to have a uniform. And he loves work. He loves a lot of activity kind of work, and they had him packaging washers because that's what the worst group did. He was in the worst group and all that. I would love to say, that it all worked beautifully. It didn't. But the beautiful thing about that day is they apologized to him, and each person did. As a matter of fact, we had a person from each of his phases at the workshop, and all of them said, now thinking about it, especially after the fact, it was a dumb thing to do. But if we had been honest from the beginning, it didn't make sense. They didn't have an alternative, and they terminated the meeting. That was the beauty of the meeting. They didn't say, Jim, you don't have to be at the workshop. You can run the car wash. Here's the job. Goodbye. We made a mistake. They said, we don't even have an alternative, but we're not going to make you go back to the workshop. We're going to take the initiative to find you something that comes closer to the futures plan. Because we don't want to succeed even. I mean, I could have said, I saw stuff they did wrong in the previous 3 times from a behavior management point of view. They could have done better. They gave them a lot of attention for acting out. They could have done a better behavioral teaching job. Would it have been a success for me to go in and teach, and then they implement it, and they're real strong, and they're real intensive, and they got one-to-one, and in 3 months, Jim is working in the workshop, and we say, we succeeded. He comes to the workshop, and he doesn't fight. And you say, but he hates it, right? Yeah, he hates it. He's not learning anything he wants to do, right? He's not spending his day remotely like he'd like to, but we've been successful. Most of the behavior programs that I know of are often set up to solve a problem that shouldn't be solved. To make a person, we criticize doctors for giving people drugs and say you're just sedating them. And then we develop behavior programs to shut people up about what they don't like. There's not a lot of difference other than tardive dyskinesia. It didn't work well. We got about a day and a half worth of activity for Jim that he liked. He got to wash the buses at the county program for half a day, and that's all the work they had for that. He worked about a half a day in an upholstery shop that he liked, and he liked working outdoors, so they got him about a day's worth of outdoor work. But they bought into that 2 days a week doing what he liked was a much better thing than the goal of 5 days a week of doing stuff he hated. And they felt like that it was actually an interesting problem to solve, to find 5 days of good work. It wasn't an interesting problem to solve, to teach him to behave in 5 days of stuff he hated. And like most good things in life, the success in this thing has come by total accident. And it's been real convoluted and slow. He got jobs, and some of the people didn't understand Jim well, and so they required him, as they always had in the past, to quit by acting out. He makes it real clear when he's finished with a job. He says, no job, sorry, quit. And people always smile and say, Jim, no, really, keep working, keep working. And then he throws them off, and they say, and they fire him. Instead of saying, oh, I'm sorry, Jim, you wanted to quit. You can quit. They label it being fired, they label it acting out. And, most recently, the last 2 changes in his life have been that he got a job. They even The thing that was great about it, though, and here one of our limited successes for systemic changes, is because of the success they saw with Jim, because it slapped them right in the face what they've been doing with him. They changed their supported work program to where now they set aside so many of the new slots as they become available for people with the worst behavior problems. They don't, now, just like automatically, they used to exclude all the gyms. They don't automatically include, you've got a behavior problem, you can go and support the work. They don't do that. But they do say, some of the people that have our behavior problems are people whose needs can't be met in this workshop, pretty clear. And so we're not going to make them work their way through, because they never will. Anyway, people have been saying the gym forever, behave yourself, you can be loan officer at the bank. That doesn't happen. So they've set aside these supported work jobs. And one of the things they created was a car refurbishing thing. And Jim loved it. He got to now start refurbishing cars. But it was in the garage of the county program. And he took one look. He saw the garage. He saw it was connected to the building that had the handicapped people in it. And he said, no way. And they convinced him to come to work. And he went to work for about 2 days. And then he walked over to the supervisor and he said, 6 weeks, real job, more money. And he kept saying that over and over. And almost like a miracle, about the 5th week, a man drives up in a pickup truck with reflectors and mud flaps, and chrome and all. And he had a hot rod place where they fixed up cars. And he was looking for somebody, and Jim heard the word job. And he went over and took his coat, took his lunch pail, and followed the man around the place as he was making the tour, saying, job, job, job. And he also pointed out to me every nick on the truck, every place that it could have been fixed up, and the man hired him. But still, he's had changes. He did that for quite a long time, and then he didn't like that. And his last job is now his first real job. The other man kind of went out of business, and then that left Jim an alert. And they found out finally there was a job getting cars ready at a car dealership, which is what he's always wanted to do. And they went down and they said, we can put a job coach here, and we can do this, and we can do that. And I thought it was going to fail, because the car dealer people said, no, that's okay, that's okay. If he can make it, he makes it. If he doesn't, he doesn't. But we don't want a job coach, and we don't want this. And when they said, well, you know, you give people an hour for lunch, he can't handle an hour, he'll get upset. They said, oh, he'll handle it. We'll, you know, he's here, he's not here. And they had to finally sit him down and say, Jim, you know, this really is it. This is your change. You've always wanted this. And he's being absolutely incredibly serious about it. He doesn't joke about it. You can't even kid him. And to think that we could have taken the challenge of saying, one day you can do this, Jim. But first, you have to work your way out of the behavior adjustment class. And then you have to go to the lowest level on the workshop floor. And then you have to, and 5 groups from now, you will get to do something that looks a little bit like the plan we just developed today, which is based on your needs. But you have to go through the 5 groups that existed before we knew your name. Because that's called individualized instruction. So in a nutshell, and you probably do a lot of this in your planning already, here's in a nutshell what we do in the futures plan. We start off by saying we're only going to work with the people that are concerned and involved in your life. And you might be with me every day, and if you don't care enough to be here, you can't come. It's up to you to decide. And we don't judge you for it, because I don't go to the futures plans for everybody I work for, because I don't have the energy, and the truth is I don't like them all enough. But you ought to be able to raise your hand and say, I know about this person, so I have something to contribute, and I'm personally concerned. And that's why I'm here. There is a tremendous emphasis on getting the direct service people there. The ground rules are the more time you spend with the person, the more you can talk. And I've seen some pushy facilitators really carry that out nicely. Beth is quite good at it. She's very pretty, and she's very vivacious and stuff, so she can get away with stuff I can't. But I mean, you know, look at a superintendent and she'll say, tell me again how many minutes a day you work with him. And she'll suggest maybe the superintendent could sit back there, and maybe that direct service person could sit here closer to the pavement, because they're going to have more to offer. To this part of it, because I know you. The superintendent might have a lot to offer when it comes to how could we ever achieve this thing. But today we're here to talk about the person. We do a very brief history of the person. The only rule there is you can't pull out a record because you probably won't find stuff there that's relevant to this part of what we're talking about. And that's why it's extremely important for parents to be there, brothers and sisters. Because how many people that you work for can you tell me much about their history if I were to say to you, tell me in the next 10 minutes the major stuff that's really happened in this person's life that is of meaning to them, has affected them. We can talk about when they came and when they left and that kind of thing. But we can't say, well, he was about 5 when we found out something was different. It always bothered him that his brothers and sisters moved. He never did. But it's that kind of personal history, not clinical history, not Freudian history, but just like you would say to me. If I said, 10 minutes, tell me about the stuff in your life that's happened, then I ought to know if I'm going to live with you and work. Usually, powerful stuff doesn't come out of that. But I mean, I did one in Colorado where there was a woman who had, at age 2, her mom and dad died. She moved to Texas to live with her grandmother. She came back at age 27 after 25 years away. No one knew what happened in those 25 years. Probably never even went to school or anything. She had spina bifida and was mildly retarded maybe. Came back to live with her brother after her grandmother died. And in the space of 6 months, made 9 moves. A couple because of her behavior. 2 or 3 because the group home closed down, because the foster home lost its license. She couldn't get along with her sister-in-law. And she made 5 daytime because of changes in programs. And everybody knew that. And it wasn't until we kind of put up a chart that said, born here, moved to grandmother, and then we left about 6 feet of space, and then put in 6 moves, that people started saying, wait a minute, it won't make me feel better when she hits me with her crutches tomorrow. But what do we got here? We got a person, 25 years living with a grandmother, and now in 6 months their life turned upside down. They began to look at it a little bit more from her point of view. And that's been one of the most important things that I've seen. Herb does a good job. Some people, as they go through this history, say, what do you think he was thinking? What did this mean to him, to her? Rather than just a straightforward history. And then we ask people very quickly to draw a map that shows the places in my life. Literally a map. Where am I? In 3 months following me around, where would you find me? And with some people, it's in the group home, on the bus, workshop. Oh yeah, we go out, and then you put frequencies up, once a month, 2 times a month. We then ask people to literally draw a map of the people in the person's life. Who's close to me? Is it positive or negative? What's their relationship? And try to do that visually. The closer put the person in the middle, the closer the person is, the closer they are on the map, the better the relationship, the bigger the line, something like that. That's one of the saddest maps ever drawn, because for far too many people, the only people on the map are, people with disabilities and people that are paid to be there, and a mother. I did one the other day for a woman that nobody on the map had been there more than 6 months. And we sit and plan independently of that. We develop plans that don't in any way reflect that maybe one of the things that's going on in this woman's life is there's nobody in her life that she's known more than 6 months. So guess what? She doesn't trust anybody. And no one knows her well enough to help her. We ask, then it's real variable, according to the person and the people. We ask things like, what choices does the person have? Not what could they make, not what their skills are, but what choices do I really have? And what choices that most people have do I not have? Because it's kind of important there, too. To make it real clear what I don't get to choose about. What's my reputation? Not what I do. What's my reputation? When people are having coffee and they talk about me, what do they say? Do I have health problems? What are they? What am I good at? What really bothers me? Anything that you think needs to be described for me to understand the person. And then we ask the people to say, this is all non-judgmental, okay? People, about the choices especially, they have trouble saying, why she doesn't have this choice, but, and they want to explain why they don't let her choose. We don't care. We just want to know, because that's just descriptive. But then we do move on to a judgment. And the judgment is, you tell me, what do you like about what you see up there? Where is their capacity that can be built? Where is there stuff that's really negative? Where are the mistakes that we got to stop repeating? Now, this is all coming from them, not me. I don't know the person most of that. It's real important to understand that. The same people that have been failing the person, the same people that have been developing plans that are almost totally independent of this person's life, those same people, when they have the opportunity to actually meet independently of some setting. We try to do this in a bar or a church or a library, okay, out of people's turf. When they have a chance to do that, and when they're told, all we're here to do is to get a better understanding of this person and see if we can come up with a better future and what we might do about it. But we don't have to come up with a behavior plan today. We're not having the meeting because it's 1 year since the last one, 90 days since the last one, or the day after she bit somebody. When none of those things are there, and the people have a chance, and they're told anything you say goes on the paper, people say all kinds of things. Because I should be clear, I think that this actually functions much more as simply a record rather than a plan. When you come out of this, you come out of 10 or 12 pages worth of information about the person. And you come out with stuff that didn't even go up on the paper, that you heard other people and stuff. And from that, the ISPs and the IHPs and things can be developed better. And we then move on to what's a better, brighter future, and then what would have to change. And I want to get into that more. I just want to make the point that if you don't go on to redrawing the maps, we literally put a blank piece of paper up and say, we just did places. You guys, this is places now for her. What would places look like if we were doing the job that really met her needs? If we could come back in 6 months or a year and redraw it, what would we like it to look like? And we could defend it by, this map looks a lot more like what she wants and needs than what's just available. That kind of thing. If you didn't move on to that, this so far is a recipe for depression. Teams, I have had teams stop and say, wait a minute, before we go on, we need to talk about, we're out of whack here. We have been punishing this person and yelling at this person and being angry at this person for 2 years. And now in our own words, we have just put up a story that says, nothing in Mary's life is designed to meet her needs. We're not evil people, we're not mean people, but the truth is, if we look at her history, we look at now, and if someone put a gun to our head and said, can you honestly say that even 70% of her life has ever been designed to meet her needs in terms of where she lives, who she lives with, where she spends her day, the confidence of the staff around her, the number of staff. Can you justify that by saying that's what she needed? Most people say no. That's why it is kind of important to say, we do this not to indict the current system, but to get a good handle so we can say, move on to this. And then we'll spend quite a bit of time this afternoon on how you go about implementing something like that. This process has really changed my thinking a lot. I was trained to be an elitist. Trained, just pounded into it. You're a behavioral psychologist, you know. These other people don't know. It's up to you to write the plan. It was relatively easy to admit other people knew the person better than I did, because often I'd never met the person. So it's pretty easy to say. However, we still said, you guys know the person better, so you got to tell me. But I have the solution. You tell me about the person, you tell me what's wrong, I'll write the plan, I'll give it to you, I'll be angry when you come back and say you can't implement it. But of course, I don't know your situation either. So you may actually have some things happening that you can't implement my plan. So I'll modify it because, oh, I didn't know there were only one of you. I thought there were 7. Oh, I mean, you can't implement a 1-to-1 plan if you have a 1-to-15 ratio. It was that kind of thinking. This futures planning has affected me in a way to where I sure have lost the elitism I had. The same people that have been failing the person, when they have a chance to think in terms of what the person needs, when they have a chance to think in terms of future, and also when they have a chance to do that and they know that no one is going to say, you said this in the meeting, so you got to do it. They really are freely saying, this is what I think this person needs. They're going to be asked at the end to make a commitment, to do something, because the plan in the absence of commitment is kind of silly too. But you can open your mouth and somebody is going to say, you brought it up, now you've got to do it. They come up with incredible plans. They come up with plans like for Jim, where why was it after 5 years of trying to make him go through the workshop? And no one got up and said, this is the way the world is. We just said, who's Jim? What's his life look like now? What works and what doesn't work? And when they started getting, what doesn't work is when you make Jim work with a bunch of other disabled people. What doesn't work is when you make Jim sit at a table. What doesn't work is when you make him do fine motor packaging. What does work? When you get Jim away from other disabled people, get him out in the open and doing anything with cars. It did not take a genius then to say, this, when someone raised their hand in the futures meeting and said something about an alternative in the workshop. And everybody in the room turned and looked at the person and just kind of looked, and she said, dumb idea, right? We did a plan for a guy who was living with 23 other people, 2 of whom stole everything that he had. He was extraordinarily possessive. He bit people if they stole stuff, and he hated noise and confusion. When we got to the better, brighter future part of it, a woman raised her hand right away and said, he could do better in Red Cottage than Orange Cottage. Red Cottage also had 25 people in it, but the 2 guys that did the stealing wouldn't have been there, and it was a quieter place. And I wanted to throw the magic marker right through this woman. I mean, the future will be another 25-bed place. But 2 or 3 of her colleagues just gently, much more gently than I would have, looked at her and said, Mary, come on. Red Cottage is an improvement, right? But let's look. And they looked at the guy. They said, is there anything on those pages that needs 25 people? She said, no, I guess not. I was thinking in terms of what we have to offer. But what I would like to do, starting after lunch, is to say that, it's a lot more, there's a lot more technology to that in terms of trying to figure out what people need. And I don't want to not cover, I'm going to spend quite a bit of time this afternoon. Got to be honest, everybody we work with, well, other people we work with, we've never implemented somebody's futures plan as envisioned, and thank God, because they change in the planning stage. But even when we tried, we could only do a part of it. And even if we could have done all of it, if you could get Merle out of this situation into a situation that fits a lot better. Merle still has learned what? When people don't listen to me, I hit them and they do. When I get angry, I say, fuck you a lot. He's in a lot of trouble. He's got a lot of behavior that he's learned. Just straightening out his life isn't going to change that. It's going to make it easier. So what I want to focus this afternoon on is how to combine supporting the person with still managing them to change. And we want to begin with the support, because at least most of the teams we work with, if they're asked, go away, come back, and give me 2 things you're going to do to be more supportive of Mary and meeting her needs before we get about the behavior management stuff. And people come back with things like, we thought about it and we've decided to teach Mary to handle frustration better. And everybody kind of smiles like, that sounds good. Teaching an alternative behavior to aggression. And you say, wait a minute, if I was married here, I'd be kind of disappointed. My face would have just fallen. I'm going to say to you, I'm bringing you a present. I'm going to teach you to handle frustration better in your life. Oh, shit. I'm going to help you get rid of some of the frustration in your life. I'm going to try to look at your schedule, what's happening in your life. We're going to try to get rid of as much of the junk as we can in your life. And then we're going to say, you also got to handle frustration differently. Let's see if you can start finding a different way to show you're frustrated. Boy, that's a very different little scenario than smiling and saying, guess what? We're not going to do anything to the crap in your life. We're just going to help you respond to it. But they really did. I mean, most of the teams come back thinking that they've done that. They're doing something to support me by teaching me. Well, that's a great thing, but it's second in the sequence. And it's hard to, that's what we're really trying to do with the future. The sad thing is, that is true. That is true. And it comes back to haunt us. And it's one of the things that we'll deal with that this afternoon. It's one of the things that you will have to deal with if you ever start doing things specially for people. The bizarre thing that begins to happen is people get angry and they say, you can't do that for everybody. And you say, right. And then they say, so you can't do it for Mary. And you say, that's bizarre. You know, I can understand saying we can't do something for everybody. But when that results in, so you can't do good for anybody. Okay, it's 11:45. We'll meet back here. There's nothing worse than an incompetent self-starter. So. I have forgotten. I had the. There's a one book I didn't put on the reading list is. Now I can't even remember the name of it. He Got Hungry but Forgot His Manners. It's a novel by Jimmy Breslin, and it's about the state of the welfare system in the city of New York. And one of the quotes about the absurdity that struck me, that was a good one. This woman, Octavia, that the quote is about, works in the welfare system, and a woman is describing to her that she no longer will be able to get child care because the system has said to her, as long as she is willing to go to vocational school and be a fry cook, she can get free child care. But if she wants to go to college and study languages and be a teacher in high school, she can't get the child care. And the welfare worker comes to understand that in the real world, when you hear this stuff, it sounds quite realistic and you get upset. But when you get back in your office, it makes great sense. I wanted to, I just cannot be real clear to you about how futures planning fits in your process. I don't know how it fits in our process real well. We do it differently than you guys. We have an IHP team, and the case managers in our system, by and large, work for the counties, but they work for the same system that is the major service provider. And they play a role usually as chairing the meeting, but they often don't do that. Their role is to case manage, is to get the services to the person theoretically. They sort of do what no one else will do that's left, that has to get done in the client's life. If they don't like that, that's not fair, but they do end up spending a lot of time doing that. We have had trouble recently related to the futures planning, and I would expect you would too, so I want to cover that. The trouble begins usually in the first workshop when we're talking about futures planning as a concept, and the people that come from our ICFMR programs, our ICFMR funded group homes, they fairly quickly raise their hand and say, this is going to be real difficult to do because we work in an ICFMR. And what they mean is that it's kind of a medical model thing, it's pretty structured, and it's hard to think about doing things outside the system, doing things flexibly, and they're right. But there's another side that makes it easy, and that is, one of the sad facts is often the people that come from our larger, more segregated programs have less interesting futures plans because often we don't have outside people involved in the planning. Everybody at the plan is somebody paid to be there that has a work relationship with the person other than maybe a family member. And while the plans themselves are less interesting, it's real easy to see how to implement it because it's all sort of within the system. And people look to the system for the answers. Like if it's supported work, people say, who's the supported work job placement person? We'll go get him and he'll help get the job. We still have a problem, though, and you will if you do anything like this with the surveyors, because they're very disturbed if you make decisions outside the IHP team meeting. They're less disturbed if you make sure that those decisions are run past the team, and they have a rightful objection. They've been concerned that sometimes we've had a thing called a futures planning meeting. Pretty significant decisions are made about something going on in somebody's life, and they run and go do it, and they don't take it past the IHP team. In other words, they act like administrators. It kind of burns me that we get a bunch of people together that care about the person, they democratically deal with the issues, they come up with something to do, and we've been being criticized, but again, rightly, by the surveying team. And when the residential director takes it upon herself to just say, you are staying here, I don't care what the team says, you've been a bad person, we're going to punish you, the director can, get away with that kind of stuff. So we have had to work out a mechanism to where any of the decisions made in this planning, somebody has to take responsibility if they're actually going to take place, to go to the team meeting and to raise the issue. And so we do a real simple thing of saying, okay, here's the futures planning, we've done it, we've got an idea about what we'd like to do. Is anybody willing to take any part of this to the team meeting? And somebody raises their hand and says yes. Well, then that gets into the IHP. If no one says they're willing to do it, nothing happens. Futures planning doesn't have any authority. If we gave it authority, I think it would crumble. Futures planning is a way for people to get together and think creatively about a person, and if something rings true to them, to go do something about it. If you've got to go through the hoops to do that, if you've got to put it into an ISP or an IHP, good. Do that. I've been to futures planning meetings where nothing happened. John O'Brien and I did one in Georgia. We did the present, we did the future. People had good ideas about what would better meet Pepe's needs. And when we said, who's willing to do anything about what's up here, people sat on their hands. Because Pepe was an active hepatitis B carrier. It was biting people. And all kinds of illicit things unrelated to Pepe, which we didn't know about at the time, were going on among that group of people. And they were hating each other and Pepe, and nothing came out of it other than Pepe got institutionalized. So, futures planning is no guarantee of anything. But if we tried to guarantee, and we tried to say, if you open your mouth, you better be willing to do it, it would become like most other planning. And so we don't want it to do that. But I would caution you, we do something as simple as, we had this idea about how things could be different for route. Anybody willing to take it as a goal statement to the IHP? Well, for some of the stuff, it's so minor that it's the kind of thing you do without team decisions anyway. Well, that just people go do. But if it's the kind of thing that no matter where it came from, it would go to the team meeting. It goes to the team meeting. If the team decides to do it, they do it. If they don't, they don't. However, that's in ICFMRs. The closer you get to a real community setting, the messier it gets. Because it may very well be that a pastor is at the meeting. And he says, oh, you mean Ralph would maybe be happier working outside doing yard work than at the workshop? Well, I think we could get him a job, working part-time at the church, cleaning up. Well, lo and behold, if the IHP team contacts the pastor and says, in our professional judgment, it is not time for supported work for this guy, the pastor is likely to say, go shove it. Because the pastor's not on the IHP team. The pastor's not controlled by the human service system. That could be good or bad. I'm not suggesting that it's good. I'm just suggesting that it reflects integration in the community, and it reflects the fact that futures plans, if they're done well and created well, involve a lot of people outside the human service system. And quite rightfully often, they don't care about our rules and regs. They just operate and do things. That can be good, it can be bad. But it is much harder to guarantee to your superiors that all this stuff will follow like everything else. The more you involve other people in the person's life, brothers, sisters. I mean, we actually had a brother almost get in a fight when people told him that he wouldn't be able to do something with his brother. He said, I don't work for you. I'm going to go do it. I think in this particular case he was right. He could have been wrong. But it is, there is that issue. If you do this planning outside of your ISP and your IHP planning, you got to find a way to get it in. Just to give you some thoughts about it so that you can kind of contrast it for yourself with your planning. We say everything is person-centered that we do. This is as close to being person-centered as anything I've ever seen. I mean, it literally, all we are there is talking about the person. It's the best for listening to each other that I've ever seen. You ever get the feeling at an IHP meeting when the nurse starts making a report, nobody's listening? And then the psychologist starts making a report? And we had a game we made up one time, like what's the true notion of an interdisciplinary team? The characteristics. One would be a doctor couldn't head it. Secondly, people had to talk at the same time, at least part of the time, because if no one ever talked at the same time, it was pretty clear they were never interacting. And just some of the silliness. This is true about people listening to each other. Other people are better than I am at making it capacity and opportunity seeking. Beth Mount is extremely good at that. The best futures planners are people that say, now there might be a bunch of garbage up there on the paper that we've put up about what's going on in the person's life, but at least I personally see 4 places we could really build on. You say Ralph does real well when he's by himself with 4 other people and they're having a good time, but he only gets to do that once a month. Who's willing to raise their hand and say they'll make it twice a month, 3 times a month? Little bits and pieces of good stuff, what's working, what isn't working, and building on it. Because you can obviously beat yourself to death, continuing to point out the mistakes that are up there on the paper. It greatly reinforces the notion that informal knowledge and folklore about the person is probably extraordinarily important and is not in the records. The number of times where people say, well, we could do this with so-and-so, and someone says, oh, no, you couldn't. And they say, you sure could. I work with him every day. And people say, that's not in the record. It's not anywhere here that he can do that or likes that. And again, it's the kind of knowledge that you almost never find in records. The hooker, though, is that it is real clear. I have never, ever in my life seen a futures plan that focused on the person's behavior. It focuses on our behavior. And it makes it real clear that things have to change on our part. Any plan that calls for the major behavior change to be the client has to be at fault for us. The client's in the least position to make the biggest change in the first place. We're the ones that are supposed to be the most competent. And as I said about that county that was really testing what we meant about commitment to the person and supporting the person, that county also taught me about what an individual habilitation plan really means. I thought I had been involved in individual habilitation planning. I don't think I ever had to that point. Because for some reason, I was not rubbed raw by the fact that there were policies. How can you have policies and have individual habilitation plans? It's an interesting question. You have a workshop. If I walk up and punch you and you're a staff person, I'm kicked out for 3 days. Wait a minute. Why, that's a policy. We've had it 15 years. Which means you had it 12 years before I even arrived. Does it have a strong impact on my plan? It sure does. Then how is it that I have to follow that policy? Why does the team simply say, there's a workshop policy that says you must be expelled, or you do this, or you do that? I'm not saying we throw it all out, but we have had more discussions and arguments in this one county because teams have begun to say, I know we have to have policies, we'll try to follow them, but please. Why do we have that policy? To make things safe and to teach people not to hit. If we kick him out when he hits, he will do it more frequently. Have we made places safe, or have we taught him anything? No. Why do it? Well, because there's a policy. And this contrast between having to set up a human service system to serve lots of people and individual people, there's no solution to it, obviously, no systemic solution, but it makes it real clear to people. And the other, again, a real hook in this whole thing is that most of the people, obviously because that's the way organizations are created, most of the people of the futures planning are down here in the system. Yet most of what they're talking about doing is changing their behavior, their own behavior, and the behavior of their supervisors. And they have little authority to do that. And it's real clear, if you don't give power to those people, there's a real problem. We're not talking about replacing your normal bureaucratic planning, IHP and ISP. I think of it as a way to learn more about the person and have that as a record and say, I'm going to take this to every planning meeting for the person and get as much of it incorporated as I can. As I just indicated, a lot of planning tends to minimize conflict and try to say, well, there's a conflict here. If we did this, we'll be in conflict with that, so let's don't do it. And this simply says, let's do it, or if we can't, but let's recognize where we got conflict and do something about it. And better, I know this is true of most IHP planning, they're supposed to be. Somehow, this works a lot better toward people saying, what would it take to do it, rather than continuing to say why we can't do it. As I've indicated already, it asks for people for commitment. It doesn't assign like an IHP does. I'm glad somewhere something gets assigned. I'm not opposed to that. It's just this planning process is not a good idea. It tends to stifle people being creative. It is incomplete without action. A great plan where people talk about the future and how it might be achieved, and no one makes a commitment to doing anything about it, that's all just sort of talk. And it depends on personal support of the person more than anything I've ever seen. And I don't want to make this sound like magic or anything like that. I'm still absolutely dumbfounded by, and I guess it makes you wonder how uncreative we often are. I'm dumbfounded by the changes that we get from people as they go through futures planning. That come out and say, we used to look at this guy as a bundle of problems. And now, I'm not saying, they're not listening to me. I'm not creating this change. They're doing it themselves. They say, we used to look at this guy as a bundle of behavior problems. We used to think of him as somebody to be fixed. I now see a lot of the positive stuff in him I never saw before. I recognize how much I and other people are contributing to his problems. I see that there is a lot more for us to focus on in his life than his behavior. His behavior is one of them, but there's a lot more. A woman in this county that I keep mentioning to you calls herself the Dragon Lady. Herself, she's labeled herself the Dragon Lady. She's very proud of being mean. She's one of the meanest people I've ever met in my life. I just found out the other day she went into a guy's hospital room who was dying. He works in their program. And the only reason she went in is his wife asked her to. She was already at the hospital to visit her son. And when he said, gosh, I didn't think you'd come visit me, she said, I didn't. Your wife made me come in here. When he asked her how the workshop was, she said, it's been great since you've been here. She's real honest. She may not be accurate. I'm not saying she's perceptive, but she tells the truth. At the second futures planning meeting for one young man, she brought up the idea, he smells things, he smells seats, he smells people, he smells tables, food, anything. She brought up the idea of getting him a fake smelly rose and putting it on his table, and maybe he would smell that. If he's working, like in the workshop, they work with rubber that has a distinct smell, he will smell that. And she thought, this would be more appropriate, at least, smelling a rose rather than other things, and it might stop him from smelling everything else or help. This was, okay, and she wasn't the nicest person. This was a great idea for her. The school principal, who was also in the whole thing, who was a very strong supporter of the project and was a good guy, real positive guy. He jumped all over him. He said, that's a stupid idea, rose. this guy, we're not going to put a rose in front of that guy. What do you want me to do? Take it to McDonald's? And it'd be, I mean, that's silly. And the woman kept saying, but we got to do something. What other things could we? And he kept at her. And finally, he stopped. He said, well, I guess I'll try. And she left, and I went over to him. I was going to lay into him. What are you doing? And this woman just made a positive. And he said, I'm sorry, Wade. He said, I can't leave her alone. He said, 2 months ago, jokingly but half seriously, she's talked about breaking his fingers if he did that again. And here's this woman now saying, you know, maybe we can get a rose for him. And this is a woman who had worked with him for a number of years and who is a parent who has a son in the workshop. I don't know what it is, but there are people that, I guess it's also one, you know, again, one of the few times where a lot of people are together, they get to listen to each other. And even the worst guys in the world usually have some advocates, but they don't often get to talk about it in front of other people. And people begin to see that. I don't honestly know why. I just know when they go through the whole process, there's a pretty strong effect on the people. And if you made me tear up, what we do is we put this up on big sheets of paper. That's a real critical thing. So you can constantly look up there and see what other people have been saying. And then we reduce the date in half by 11 sheets and give it back to the people. Even if we never did that, I would still do futures planning because people come out of the meeting. We usually do it in 2 3-hour blocks, just ballpark idea. The first 3-hour block is that part that I told you about where we document up to the future. We document the past and the present. And one of the reasons we do it that way is we don't want to run too long a meeting. And secondly, even though we do try to get everybody there that ought to be there, that knows something and can contribute something, they almost never are always there. And so we take those sheets of paper and track them down over the next couple of weeks and show them and say, this is what people say about Ralph. What have you got to add? And they add what they want to add. Or we get them to come to the second meeting if we can. And then in the second meeting, we briefly review what we did in the last meeting, and that's when we say, what's a better, brighter future for Ralph? If we were, and future is misleading. I don't mean 20 years from now. That's easy. 20 years from now, he'll be the loan officer in the bank. And now, for the next 10 years, we can forget about it, right? What I mean by future is, if tomorrow we could wave a magic wand and we could do better by him, if we could really serve him in a way that meets his needs, what would we do tomorrow? Would he live with 25 people? Would he spend his day in this workshop? How would we change that? How far away are we from doing what we ought to? And we do that in the second meeting. And we begin in the second meeting. We begin in the second meeting with this. The very end of the meeting is when people say, well, what would have to change for us to get there? And I don't know about you, but I don't work in very many human service systems that are good at problem solving, anything. And I don't mean to pick on human service. I don't know, any group of people that are all that great at solving their problems. And this surely alone doesn't solve that problem. I mean, we're not any more successful than you at getting a lock put on somebody's dresser drawer. It takes 2 months, just like it does for everybody else. It is, however, a little bit harder for people to turn down things when they're tied to individual clients. We've found that. Why we have a rule against, or there's a policy that says, and if you tie it to Mary and you say, this is Mary, this is why, it makes it a lot harder to say, why no one can have a lock, or no one can do this. You can say, that's a good general policy to have. We're talking about Mary, and here's why. And even for stubborn bureaucrats and stuff, it puts them in a position of believing that, there are 7 other people conspiring to ruin the system. It's not one person going and advocating. It's 6 or 7 people, 10 people, 12 people, often. And I show you this overhead just to show you that it is a lot. I mean, if you don't think about your basic value, you could come up with futures planning that says this guy needs to go to the institution. I mean, If you work with people that have values that say those are okay, it could go in that direction. However, one of the things that makes it not go in that direction is we're talking about individual people. And even people that go into the meetings and say, in general, I believe people with behavior problems should be in developmental centers. When you tie that down to the individual people, it's pretty hard to justify. What is it about Merle that is settled positively by him living with 18 other Merles? When you say, forget philosophy and big deal and normalization, let's just talk about him. Now tell me why that's a better future. It's real hard to justify. And so you get movement in a positive direction anyway. But it sure helps to have people that have strong positive values. This is a constant thing. And this yields this kind of redesign and change. Like I said, that county that said, this is silly, we have sent some of the people in our daytime program to the behavior adjustment class and we've sent them there forever because they'll never behave their way out. And instead of just a gradual change, some of the teams have been good enough to say, well, you know, we could move them out of the behavior adjustment class to the workshop floor, but from Mike's point of view, I remember a behavior specialist even saying, the workshop floor is just a bigger, noisier behavior adjustment class. Because this, again, was a guy that liked quiet, outdoors, not being around a bunch of other people with disabilities. And so they ended up getting him a supported work job outside working because they saw they had to change their system. And more than any other thing, I think it has caused me, like I said, to rethink the policies and procedure stuff, the givens that have just always been there. We do this because we've always done it. It really, really is scary to people that want to behave that way because it obviously makes you continuously say, what do you mean? Why? Can you tell me for Ralph? Why? Can you tell me for Mary? Why? I understand that that's a good general policy, and you tell me why we need to do it. But especially in your position, I would recommend it sure paid off for us. We push a lot this idea that people are not going to always go along with what you want to do, and that doesn't make them bad people. And if we're trying, part of this process is built on trying to understand why a person with a disability would do something bizarre and hurt somebody. Then we can apply that same thinking to why would a person in power in this human service system do something that ends up hurting Ralph? I bet there's a reason. I bet he or she doesn't go to bed at night and say, good, I screwed 3 disabled people today. I bet they have reasons for doing what they do. And if we could understand them, then we might be able to say to them, what can we do to help? We need to get here. You're not going there. What can we do for you so that you can help us get there? We're not any more successful in dealing with bureaucrats than anybody else. But it is harder for people to turn things down when they are tied directly to an individual person. The reason that the futures planning for us is so important is that many, many, many of the people that we find ourselves working with are working and living each day in programs where the settings and the services offered have no chance at all of working. If people would stop doing what doesn't work, our system would come to a grinding halt in many, many places. If you simply said, I've been doing this with somebody, it's never worked, I'm going to stop doing it. And presuming you don't have a better idea, because that's why you're doing it, why you're continuing, things would come to a halt. I've begun to believe a halt is a lot better than fake progress. I'm really serious about that. You go into a workshop and you see a young woman, an ignorant young woman, who's just been hired off the street, who was being trained to work with that group over there, but because you have a lot of behavior problems, she's been assigned your one-to-one. She is far less competent than the woman who was running the group in the first place. But the woman running the group in the first place can't be your one-to-one because she's got responsibility for 12 other people. So you get assigned. and I walk into the workshop and I see this guy sitting off over a table by himself. He's bored to death. She's bored to death. Both of them are working at something. Neither of them even know what it does or where it goes when it leaves the workshop. Every 45 minutes I say to you, break time, and we get up and walk into a room, and I sit down and have a cigarette, and you twiddle your thumbs. You think it's a changing work assignment. You don't know what it means to give you a break, because it sure isn't a break for you. And then about every 2 hours I attack you. And we call that one-to-one an extraordinary intervention, and when that fails, we ship the person away. And any honest person looking at that would say, this has no chance of working. We may do it. I mean, God, if we had a better idea, we'd do it. But let's don't tell each other stories and say, let's see if it has a chance. This may work. Because a whole bunch of what we're doing doesn't, and a whole bunch of what we're doing, even if it worked, who would give a damn? I went to Georgia the other day to work with a young man who has been essentially in restraint and isolation for 12 years. This is the worst situation I've ever seen in my life. He lives in the state mental hospital. He is mentally retarded, but he's in the forensic center on the MI side, so they can put him in seclusion. And he lives in seclusion. He gets out of his room an hour to an hour and a half a day. And during that time, he bathes himself, changes his clothes, smokes 3 cigarettes, watches whatever is on television from the point that he finishes all that to the end of the hour and a half when a timer goes off, and he goes back into his room. He takes off his clothes. It's about 10:30 in the morning. They say good night. He usually threatens to hit his head unless he gets another cigarette, so he gets another cigarette. And then he goes to sleep till lunch. And then they wake him up, and he sits either on the stainless steel toilet that's attached to the wall or on his mattress, and he eats his lunch. And then they say good night again. And he goes back to sleep. He has 29 or something battery charges waiting on him at the police station if they ever tried to, release him. Brought by staff at the state hospital. He is an extraordinarily dangerous young man. He's real nice. I never saw it because I was only there 2 days, but they tell me, he can be smiling and really nice, putting his hand through his shirt and then just come down and hit you. He broke somebody's back. He didn't mean to, I'm sure. He kicked. The person's there, he kicked, broke her back. They wanted me to come down and to help them develop a program so that he could be released from seclusion. And I asked, where would he go? Well, he would go into the population of people in the forensic center. The population of people in the forensic center, well, I said, how many of those guys would love to see Jerry blow up? They said about 3/4 of them. So your goal is to get him out of seclusion into a group of people who are thieves, murderers, behavior problem people themselves. He was better off where he was. You ever seen a habilitation plan that looks like that? I think you have succeeded in making this room warm. I did, it doesn't do it.
I turned the switch off.
No, I did too. Oh, this switch. No, I did that switch. It's mad at me. Anybody, you couldn't tell me till you knew the person whether there was anything wrong with that, right? I mean, there must be a lot of jobs in Minnesota for people that know their color. No, really, I mean, of course it could be important. It could be a part of the job. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that set of objectives. It's just that if that's also going on in my life, then I got a problem with the traditional program plan. I have 2 problems. The first problem is the traditional column ignores very real problems in my life that if I was the person, I would be waving both hands saying, weren't we talking about some of these? And secondly, as the person, the teacher for this person, who is truly concerned about the fact that the person hardly ever stays at anything very long, and who would like to see improvement about that. I, as a teacher, am very concerned because, you know, if you don't do something about this side, I may have a lot of trouble with the stuff on this side. We want you to learn your colors. I want help here. We want you to learn your colors. I want help here. We'll give you some help here. How about now working on colors, son? Okay. A whole bunch of people's lives get so out of whack that if you stay with the left-hand column, it's hard to even achieve that. You're not that good a teacher. You're not that, the service system isn't that good. I would refuse to work with Merle under these circumstances. It's easy for me to say because I haven't been assigned. I would refuse to work with Merle under those circumstances. I would want to know who in the world says Merle has to be here. I have a lot of questions. I might ultimately find myself, against my better judgment, working with Merle in a building that I don't think he needs to be in, with a group that he doesn't and stuff. But I mean, but again, still, even there, who said this task? And who said I have to get to meet Merle under these circumstances? I mean, I'd have a lot of questions. I guess if it would meant my job or something, I would do it. I don't know, but I would sure want to fight it. I wouldn't relish the challenge. I don't know if I'm good enough to work with him because he's so frustrated and mad about this. I'd much rather be doing something that he enjoys at first, if I could. We find this happening quite a bit. In the futures planning, you come up with a really nice idea of some answers to these questions. You probably already knew it, if you knew the person well. So we make up a list of things like that. We say, these are good things. Let's put them down in writing. And then we ask, in the last 3 months, how often has Mary got to do that? How often have these things happened to Mary? These good things. And a very frightening percentage of the time, the team says none, if very little, if any. Pepe, the fellow I told you about that they institutionalized, Pepe loved to go for car rides. He enjoyed them, and they calmed him down. I said, how many times has he been for a car ride in the last 3 months? They said, none. I said, why? They said, he bit the driver the last 2 times we went out. And I started to say something, and they said, but he likes to, and they wanted to move on. And I said, what about car rides? And they said, didn't you hear it? We just said he bit the person the last 2 times he went out. I heard, but I don't think Happy did. And honestly, selfishly, if I was on that staff, I would want to find a way that's safe for Pepe to go on car rides. I would know that the car ride itself could be dangerous, but let's try to make that safe. Let's build a plexiglass box to put him in. Let's do something. Because if he doesn't go on car rides, I know I will pay the price, and I know Pepe will pay the price. And he was. He was upset a lot of the time. Nothing good was happening in his life. It was all justifiable because of his behavior, and Pepe and everybody else paid the price. Somebody has to break the cycle. Because, as odd as it may sound, you know it's true. Often, the greater the person's need for good stuff happening, the less likely it is. Jim, the guy with Down syndrome that works really well, you ask him, what do you like to do around here? He tells you. You say, how often does that happen? He says, every day. This is kind of a fun place to come. And then you take the toughest guy in the whole group and you say, what matters to this guy? How often does he get to do that? Who has the worst, most boring, repetitious, monotonous work? The people that tolerate it the least. It's as if I had knee surgery about a year ago, and it wasn't a big deal. They just did that arthroscopic stuff where they just put, I don't know what they put. I wouldn't look. But I didn't let them knock me out because I had to do a workshop the next day in West Virginia. And so they just did a spinal, and I now know what that means. If you've never had one, they take a 10-penny nail, and they put it right in the spine, and they hit it with a hammer. So I was not unconscious when I went to the recovery room, but I was thirsty from what they put in me. And so I was kind of waving my hands like, water, water. And there were two people on either side of me, older persons that had had major surgery and were unconscious and had tubes and stuff. And you won't believe this, but the nurses were paying more attention to them than to me. It took me forever to get my water because they had gone to the waitress school of nursing. They did not make eye contact. They knew what extinction meant. They just didn't look at me. I hoped they had gone to the human service school of nursing because they would have been spending most of their time with me, the person that needed it released. I'm sorry, but that's true. Other than when people with behavior problems demanded of us by their aggressive action, leave them alone. Follow any kind of a pattern through a group home when you spend your time. And I'm not saying that makes us evil, horrible people. There's obvious justification for it. But we got to understand how we pay a price and the person pays a price. The newest perversion of normalization is to take someone that has almost no skills, lots of behavior problems, give them boring work to do, they'd rather not do it, and so you let them sit all day in the workshop and you say it's their choice. And then every once in a while they get so bored that they have one interesting way to bring excitement to their life. They hit somebody or whatever. It is absolutely crazy to have the relationship be the worse I am, the less I get. We have to break that. And I think if there is a single kind of even positive message that came from behavior management was that all this stuff has to be earned. I think that's wrong. I think it's not realistic. It's totally in opposition to the way you want your life to be. And so one of the things I feel best about is that after futures planning, most teams go very, very strongly towards saying the people we're worried about have so little going on in their life. We're never, if we can avoid it, we're never going to arrange a contingency so they could lose the little bit that's good. And as you'll hear in the tape earlier, too many people get embarked in a situation where she misbehaved, they took stuff away. She misbehaves, they take stuff away. She gets down to where her life is cycling at the lowest ebb that it can. And you can sit out there and say, all you have to do is stop doing that stuff, pardon, you can have all this nice stuff. And she's in the pit so bad, she just says, screw it, keeps going, and keeps the negative cycle going. We have really abused that notion. I would really question ever using really powerful, really meaningful things in somebody's life as a reward. Because there's no such thing as using it as a reward anyway. It's always, especially with the important stuff, it's a punishment procedure. It isn't a reward procedure. Don't tell me that if I love my mother and I would love to visit her, that you're going to be real positive and all I have to do is do this and then I can earn my visit with my mother. All you're really saying is, Wade, you get to visit your mother a lot now. If you don't behave yourself, you won't as much. But it's a positive reinforcement contingency. It's not true. There's no such thing as a positive reinforcement contingency. All positive reinforcement contingencies have what implied? That I will not let you have this unless you behave. And I think sometimes we have taken such powerful things and used them as rewards that it gets people so freaked out and anxious that they're going to earn them that they actually misbehave because of all the anxiety. That's not to say there aren't some meaningful contingencies in life and earning this and that. But we have sure stopped using the major stuff. And we tend to focus more on trying to accommodate the needs of the person by, and you've got that in the hand. I mean, those are just arbitrary things to think about. Later this afternoon, in dealing more specifically with the punishment stuff, I'm sure you must have some sort of policy in Minnesota that says you can't kill people till you try less aversive things, right? Think about it, though. So often, that hierarchy is like a freeway, as if there's only one direction and a fairly narrow to get there, instead of like a real map that there are all kinds of things. And who says that I try time out with you and 15 minutes doesn't work and so I go to 30 Why didn't I start asking about the group of people that you're in and changing that? Why didn't I ask about the activities you have? Why don't we get creative that way? We get into this least aversive hierarchy thinking, and it automatically leads us to the next step of punishment. And the next step of punishment, instead of saying, let's look out in the person's life in a much broader way. And so we do that. And again, none of that is all that, unique. But these are very, very important. We try to make sure that people are open to breaking rules, hopefully with permission. We really frown on the use of fairness as an explanation for why we don't help people. You ever heard that? We can't do that because that wouldn't be fair. If we do that for you, we can't do it for you, and so we don't do it for anybody. That's the most hypocritical excuse I've ever heard. Because I've never had anybody who behaved consistently about it. It's always used hypocritically. One problem with fairness is I don't actually believe that. I'm using it selectively. Because when I find out that you get all the Haldol in the group, I don't take your tablet and break it into 6 equal pieces and give 5 pieces to the other people. If I believed in fairness, I would. Why should you get all the Haldol? How can I treat you that way? Give you a drug and not you a drug? Because you don't need the drug. Well, then, why do we only bring up fairness when it comes to doing positive things for people? I've never, ever heard the notion of fairness brought up about punishment. It wouldn't be fair to punish him because we don't punish her. And secondly, the hypocrisy in it is, and I know it's true with me, the hypocrisy when I talk about fairness is, I don't mean fairness. I don't want trouble in my life. And if I do this special thing for you, your mother will show up and give me grief. And I don't want to hear it. But to possibly say, I can't do this for you because I can't do it for you, would be like, well, we can only give surgery to one guy. Let's don't give it to anybody then. I mean, it makes no sense. You just got to be honest. It's like futures planning. I wish we could do futures planning for everybody. We can't. And so if parents came up to me and said, this futures plan looks good, I don't know why my son doesn't have one, I would say, I know why he doesn't have one. We chose not to. And I'm sorry. It's unfair. But all things considered, we have only so much time. We tried to do this with the people that needed it the most. But you're right, it's unfair. But to not do it out of fairness, I think would really mean, I don't want to hear it from that mother. And this stuff about other people, and that's why we can't help you. They said that about Pepe. I said, what if we sent Pepe to Oral Roberts, or Oral Roberts to Pepe? We fixed his hepatitis. Could he come back to the workshop? And they said, no, his behavior is too disruptive. It ruins it for everybody else. And while that can be true, it wasn't true in Pepe's case. What Pepe would have done is wake up everybody else. I went to his classroom. It was the dullest classroom I've ever seen in my life. 2 of the staff were sleeping, and one of them was helping somebody put tags on things and then take them off and put them on. But I have been in situations where if Pepe had shown up, it would have broken the back of the class. It was true. One more person could have ruined it for 9 people. So you bite the bullet, and you make bad decisions for Pepe because of your concern for 8 other people. I think those circumstances are very, very small compared to the number of times that excuses. My biggest problem right now in doing the futures planning, and I think it's because I never was all that close to some of the people we work with, because it's easy to stay apart if you've got an IHP between you, and if you've got a behavior plan, and if you've got tests and things. And part of it was time. I've never spent that much time in any one place lately, till this other county. So maybe I'm getting personally involved. I hope so. It's been hard to sit in those meetings and not be angry at some of the staff. And I'm trying to get over that. But it has been. There's a young man who died recently. Seizure, we think. But when he was alive, we had a futures plan for him. And his staff said, he hates the work here in the workshop. I said, all of the work? And he said, no. They said, no. He loves the manly work. He was macho man. He saw too much Rambo. And he weightlifted and he wore muscle shirts and all this stuff. And I didn't want to reinforce that kind of stuff, but at least the work seemed to be reasonable. So we said, when does he get to move pallets and stuff that he liked? Well, we only have that about once or twice a week, and it wouldn't be fair to only let him do it. We argued about that for a while and said, well, at least let's try it on a short-term basis to see if it really matters. So we did. And we also got him, his brother helped us get him 1 or 2 days a week at a recycling center, which was only a block away. About 2 months later, we had a meeting, and we asked for a report, and the people said, when he gets to move the pallets and do the macho stuff at the workshop, and when he's at the recycling center, he's a gym, he loves it, he's doing great, but you get him back to packaging that stuff in his group, and he's even worse. As if that's surprising. And out loud, I said to myself, I wish we could get more macho work for him. And I didn't mean to say it out loud, I was just thinking. And about half or 2/3, probably 2/3 of the group went. And 1/3 went. And I turned to his supervisor. And that's what's getting me. I wanted to choke him. I wanted to choke him. I said, why do you say no? And then here it comes. He's got to learn to do stuff he hates. I don't know why, but even if yes, why now? Why not after a history of some kind of success? But so if you say, but why at all? The answer always is, there are parts of my job I sure don't like. No, and then my comeback, my little childish comeback here, okay, switch jobs with Brad. No one has ever said okay. Barb, they said, I asked when she was hurting people in residential, I said, from your point of view as staff, what's wrong back here? And 2 of the women said, almost like they had planned it, and I know they didn't, they both said simultaneously, she has her way about everything back here in the group home. And I said, I'm trying to learn to control myself under those circumstances. So I turned to the wall and put up a sheet of paper to calm down, and I wrote, she has her way about. And then I said, number 1, what does she have her way about? And they said, she refused to do her laundry twice in 2 weeks. Wrote that down. What else? She has refused to bathe on occasion. Wrote that down. And then they started bumping. And so I started another column, and I said, while you guys are thinking, I'll start listing those things in her life that she has no control. Where she lives, who she lives with, when she gets up, what she eats, what she does at work, whether her family ever visits her again, what her future holds for her, where she's ever lived in the past. And you think, how could it be that somebody could think the major thing in this woman's life is that she has her way about. And what they really meant, and what we finally got to discuss about, and that was at least honest, was they were pissed that they couldn't punish her. She was, in fact, hurting people. And they were angry that they weren't able to punish her. We have to talk about that. That's a legitimate thing to talk about, and it's a legitimate thing to disagree about. Does Barb have to be punished to learn not to hurt other people? Do we have to hurt her to teach her not to hurt? It's a possibility. Let's talk about it. But to sit at this level of she has her way about everything, fairness and stuff, is to stay away from what's really, really going on. One of the other positives of futures planning is it makes it real clear we have to do everything we can. I mean, the people we work with have no control over their lives. They live in crap. They live no place any of us would ever live. And we would hope to God if we ever had a handicapped child, they would never end up where most of us work. And yet we take positive stuff into people's lives and dole it out instead of saying, if we bent over backwards, like with Brad and the work, if we bent over backwards and worked as hard as we could for 5 years, we'd be lucky as hell to have a job for Brad that he enjoyed doing. And here is something jumping out at you that says he likes to do this, and we would say no. It is really bizarre. when you'll also hear Barb talk about her job, and when she wanted to get another kind of job, and people said, she's not ready. And I said, why? And they said, she doesn't come to the workshop reliably. Remember I tell you how she leaves or doesn't come? And you say, does Barb enjoy it here? No. Do you actually think there's a skill we're teaching her, which is to come to work reliably and do stuff she hates? And so she will in the future come to work reliably and do stuff she hates? It's like a skill you acquire, like cooking? Or, I mean, do you really have those kind of limited ideas that you believe it will be impossible to find Barb something to do she likes? Because they all believe, we find something to do she likes it, she can make money, she'll come to work, no problem. She's a great worker. It's sort of like, where is your challenge? Manage the person or help them get what they want in their life. Because as gushy humanistic as this all sounds, I think it's perfectly consistent with the kind of traditional behavioral analysis. There are things that happen to people that cause them to get angry, bored, and confused. They then quite naturally act on some of that stuff, like we all do when we're mad or upset. And there's not much rhyme or purpose to it at first. And guess what? They discover when things really bother you and you do this stuff, it works. The teacher understands sign language. If I say, no, I'd rather not do this, she seems to be deep. But if I punch her in the stomach, she almost always says, oh, let's find something else for you to do. Or she leaves me alone. And this cycle is the learned part. See, it's real important to understand this. We won't have time to go into the technology of this today because I didn't think it was as important as the other stuff. But you have to understand that whole cycle because people don't. They give me this garbage about why they look at one side or the other. Why does Ralph hit people? Well, he just gets mad and hits. Well, what's the cause? Well, he got mad. Why didn't he call us congressman? Why didn't he call legal rights? Why didn't he send a telegram? Why didn't he roll over and play dead? Why didn't he ask for help? Those behaviors don't work. Hitting does. Oh, so I need to understand more. I need to understand what upsets Ralph, and I need to understand what behavior works for Ralph when he's upset. They're both very important. People say things like, they de-emphasize this. No, I'm sorry. They act like, the de-emphasis of this side is where people say, well, he's acting that way just because he gets attention. And they say, ignore it. And you'll see in a minute, I want to go into some detail. What about asking the question, why would he be so upset that he would ask for all this stuff in the first place? And what is ignoring do about that? But I don't believe any of what we've been talking about is inconsistent with anything like this. As a matter of fact, this is that old ABC analysis, antecedent behavior concept. It's just futures planning forces you to have a very comprehensive look at what we mean by an antecedent. Very often people say, well, what was he doing in the 15 seconds before he hit? I don't know. But I know for the last week he's been angry, confused. His mother hasn't visited. He hasn't had phone calls. The 5 people at the group home are really getting on his case. Where do those fit in a behavior analysis? Well, they do, but not in a real narrow data collection sense. And so, obviously, it makes sense that we would make changes at both ends. Let's change, if we can, the things that get to you. And by changing the consequences of your acts and working at a learning end, let's help you learn to behave differently in the situations when we can't control it, when we can't get rid of that stuff in your life. The toughie is to say, guess what? This isn't a lab. Guess what? These are real people. Guess what? It isn't just a management. Do you want your life being managed? Or do you want more negotiation and talking and thinking and give and take? And the hard thing is to learn to challenge people to change their behavior and do it in ways that don't totally stigmatize them and don't absolutely validate the fact that they're handicapped and that the only way we can get rid of this, away with this, is your handicap. Think of this. I say to you that I've seen this woman over here doing some things all day, keeps doing them, and I've even kind of frowned. We even talked about it during the break, and I wish she wouldn't do that stuff so much, but for some reason she keeps doing it. I'm giving you the job to make sure she doesn't do that anymore. Anybody ever done that with you? Not very often. But let's say I make it real tough. I either give you a bunch of money, I promise you a bunch of money if you can change her, or I threaten you'll lose your job. So you really are motivated to want to do it. It's real complicated because that person isn't your friend that you could go to and say, hey, guess what? This person isn't a child that we often make do things independent of whether we should. We get away with a lot of things with kids. And the person isn't a relative or a friend. And especially they're another adult. It's very difficult. I think you might start asking for me, you got a little bit more money that I might be able to give to her to get her to do it? Have you got a bat that I could use when she does it so I could whack her? It all sounds ridiculous until I say, I forgot. She's mentally retarded and you're a member of the team. Then you go, oh, whew, thank God, we'll have a team meeting, I'll call it, we'll develop a plan. The only thing that makes it at all fit is person's handicapped and it's the system. You take the handicap away or leave the handicap and just have the person be an adult in the community and you start saying, I'm going to make sure they never do this again. I'm not saying that it's ridiculous that we do that. We have a role to help people. We just need to understand. One of our difficulties is we don't have much skill at doing this because the only place we do it in our life is in this team thing which allows us to manage and stuff, and it's very difficult to learn to negotiate, to ask, especially on an almost co-equal basis. Let me finish one little study and then we'll take a break. Give you an example of that. It's a great after lunch one anyway. Okay? A little girl, 9 years old. She was accused of these things. And she had lived in the institution for 10 months. And she was going to school 3 hours a day. This was in the late 60s, before 94, 142. She walked across the grounds to another building they called a school and was there 3 hours a day. The behavior they were interested in was throwing up in the classroom. It started periodically and it got to where she threw up every day. The teacher called in a couple of psychologists and they said, what have you been doing what have you done to try to solve this? And they said, drugs, because we thought she was too anxious, so we gave her drugs, and she seemed to be more calm, but she still threw up. And we tried the perfect day program solution, which was exclusion, and it worked, as it always works perfect. The little girl never threw up at school unless she was at school. And waged up on the court. They asked the teachers, here's the crux of the situation. They asked the teachers, in terms of trying to figure out why, they said to the teacher, what do you do when she throws up? The behavior notes. The teacher said, let her go back to the dorm. We call an attendant. It takes a while for the attendant to come. The attendant takes her back to the dorm. Sometimes she comes back, but most of the time she stays there because it takes time to clean her up, change her clothes, all that. And so she usually doesn't come back. Okay, that's the factual situation. A little girl comes to the institution, starts going to a day program, has lots of tantrums and stuff. Those sort of disappear over time or go down some. She tried to run away from the class some. she starts throwing up, and it gets to be, once a week, twice a week, and now it's every day. And you find out drugs haven't worked, excluding her from school, giving her time to cool off didn't work. And then what we usually do when she throws up is we send her back to her dorm. Now, with that tiny amount of information, and if I was the teacher telling you this story at a bar, and I said, why do you think this little girl might be throwing up in my class? What are some of the things you would be willing to say to me? Say, it might be worth investigating whether this is playing a part in it, or that. What are some things that come to mind? There isn't I'm not looking for a correct answer here. There is one, but only people in Wisconsin know it. No, there isn't.
She wants to go home. She wants to go back to the dorm.
Okay, what else?
She gets first and takes her back to the dorm, and maybe the only one-on-one that she really gets. She just came from a home and she's in an institution, probably lonely.
Okay. What else?
Health concerns.
Okay.
Maybe she doesn't like the food she had.
A bunch of troublers.
Some of these are well worth bringing up, but we would maybe know sitting in the bar, the teacher would say, I know it's not food because if she gets the same food for lunch, when she doesn't go to school in the afternoon, she never throws up. I know it's not health concerns because we had it checked out, but it's worth raising. What else? I can't hear you.
Something at the school that makes her quite uncomfortable.
If she likes the word different clothes.
We've all,
She doesn't like what she's doing in class.
okay, let's just say there's another vote for that. Something about the school makes her uncomfortable what she's doing. It could be the work is too challenging, not challenging enough, it's paint. We've often done this when we have more time in a workshop. Break people up into groups of 3 or 4 and just say, speculate among yourselves. Don't make up stuff, but if there's something serious enough, you would raise it. It's not uncommon in a group this size to come up with 20, 25 different things that people would be willing to look at, okay? That's one. Secondly, the one place that in this brief thing we're missing, they usually come out to be in one of 3 areas. One, there's something about the classroom she doesn't like, or there's something about the dorm that she does, that group of things. A group of things about the person herself. Could it be something inside her? Could it be what she's eating? Could it be a general health condition? And third, and it's implied in your other stuff up here, but it's very important to separate it. The notion of the contingency between the behavior and the consequence. Okay? I say to you, if you don't think that's important, go to your mother and say, I read a study the other day where there's a little girl that likes to be in her dorm, so she throws up in school. I think your mother was saying, she likes to be in the dorm, so she throws up in school. Could you tell me more? Because so far it doesn't make sense. Why doesn't she call her congressman? Why doesn't she write a note? Why doesn't she? Why, she just throws up. She hates her class. Well, aren't there other kids in the class that don't like it? Why don't they throw up? There's got to be more to it than the antecedent. There's got to be more to it. And then you say, oh, I forgot to tell you. The only way she can get back to the dorm is throw up. She hates the class, so she throws up. Doesn't make sense to me. Oh, I forgot to tell you. If she throws up, she gets away from what she hates. Oh. So please, please, don't drop one of those out. Also, don't tell me, go to your mother and say, guess what? If a little girl throws up in class, we let her go back to the dorm. You know, I mean, if I was at Minnesota Twins game and I threw up and you made me go home, I don't know if it would reward my behavior. Because I might actually not like it. I might want to stay there. So the contingency alone doesn't make sense. Everybody that doesn't want to be in class, throw up and you can leave. Well, half the kids stay. It's got to be more than the contingency because that was available to all of them. Half the kids actually like the class. You got to talk about both. Now that may sound like semantics. It isn't. Because people tell me they've got a behavior explained and they talk about only one side. He gets mad and he hits people. That's my explanation. Well, you better start telling me about how hitting works or doesn't work. What's the effect of hitting? But also, don't just come up and tell me somebody hit because they get attention. I got to also ask, if this person was getting a lot of attention there other times, do you think they hit? Is it only because they get attention when they hit, or is it they never get any attention if they don't? There's more to it than just one side. The psychologist, the reason I raised this issue is the psychologist didn't do that. They simply asked, what do you do when she throws up? The teacher said, let her out. They said, stop that. She stays, whether she throws up or not, she stays. And in 30 days it worked. It took 30 days for her to learn a new sign, or that the old sign didn't work. Throwing up doesn't work anymore. She threw up 20-some times the second day, or tried to. I'm sure there wasn't much to throw up. But she tried to throw up 20-some times. It took 30 days, because it took a long time to teach her that throwing up meant you want to leave, right? So it took some time to teach the other. And for probably 15 years, I taught that study as a positive behavior management study. And a success. And a good example of how a teacher could, without thinking about it, teach somebody a really obnoxious behavior and not mean to. And that the simple thing to do was to reverse everything and get rid of the behavior. You rewarded the behavior of throwing up, now stop rewarding. Now I don't do that. Now I teach it as a much more complicated situation. Because while the teacher thinks it's a success, the kids think it's a success, the psychologists think it's a success, there's one very important person that may not. The little girl, who's supposed to be the subject of the whole thing. Because if we send somebody to find her, we find that she's trying to tunnel her way out of the classroom. And you say, wait a minute, you're not throwing up anymore. Isn't this a great place? She says, no, I hate it here. I always have. I just don't tell anybody because it doesn't do any good. I'm leaving. I used to run out of here. And then they locked the door. I used to have tantrums and they'd let me go home. Then the psychologist said we were rewarding tantrums. And then one day I got so upset when it didn't work that I threw up. And the teacher said, oh, go back. I would have never thought the sign where I want to leave was vomiting. But it was. And then the psychologist came again, and they changed language on me. I don't know what it is anymore, and I've given up. That's true. You say, oh, no, Wade, you come back in 6 weeks, and she likes it. You say to her, you can leave. And she says, I'll stay. Well, then you're damn lucky because you didn't do anything about it. You simply cut off a behavior avenue of escape and didn't do anything else. You're really lucky that hanging around long enough, she figured out the teacher isn't such a witch, the kid died that was pinching her, something. But she didn't do anything about it. That story, to be a positive story to me, involves somebody sitting with the teacher and saying, teacher, you are rewarding vomit. Fact. No argument. Fact. The little girl is throwing up because it works to get out of here. You want to eliminate vomiting? It'll take about 6 minutes. We make up things called tokens. You give her the token, and if she was, according to how handicapped she was, it may take time for her to learn, really, but give her the token, and she learns. You give the teacher that token, you can leave anytime. That's a lot better than vomiting. That's what you're doing now. Anytime she wants to leave, she vomits. I'm going to give her a token. I doubt if she enjoys vomiting. It's not fun. We could eliminate the behavior quickly by giving her an alternative way to get what she wants. That really is true most of the time. You give a person a way of getting what they want that's as good as the one they got, and they will stop the behavior problem. But you got another problem. What do we now have? What does the teacher say? Okay, I gave her the tokens. Now what does the teacher complain about? Because she's got something to complain about.
Never in class.
The girl's never in class. And guess what? That's a real interesting problem. Then you can sit down and say to the teacher, now we have the real problem we should have always been talking about, which is, why doesn't this little girl like this class? The vomiting was a smoke screen. I mean, that was something that got our attention because it was so obnoxious and stuff. But it wasn't even the real problem. And it was easily solved. Stop paying attention to it and do it that way. Give her an alternative way. That can be solved. The real problem is, why does she hate it here? What are you doing? What are the other kids doing? What can we do to make this a good place? Because if we don't address that, in 30 days we'll have somebody that doesn't throw up and hates being here. Terrific. I mean, that's better than throwing up, I guess, because we at least have the chance that she'll learn this is a good place and all that. But do you want people doing that? I mean, you got a lousy situation, you're behaving in a terrible way because it works. Do you want people just to come in and cut off that avenue? Or do you want them to say, why are you doing this? And so what? You don't have an answer. You work with the little girl for a long time, trying to figure, paint the room, paint her, kill the other kids, do whatever it takes to make, and you fail. Okay. Is it a real serious problem? We'll go through the extension. I mean, we'll manage this thing. But it won't be our first choice. We won't say, the real problem here is vomiting. And it doesn't matter a damn to me that the other 29 kids love the class. If you're an advocate for the little girl, are you impressed the teacher said, why, the other 29 children love this class? Great, I'm glad. You're probably a good teacher. I'm not even blaming you. But whether they like it or not is absolutely irrelevant to her. I'm not arguing that is true. Okay. In terms of the behavior program side is extremely important because an understanding of this is one of the only ways that you can get out of the cycle of saying someone is behaving in ways that are dangerous to themselves or other, highly disruptive or whatever, and then the solution always being, well, let's define the target behavior, let's develop a reinforcer menu, let's so-and-so, with the focus always being, how can we get a 30% reduction in the target behavior? That's probably not an illegitimate goal, to have the target behavior go down. But it gets everybody obsessed on the decrease side, the negative side, and if you think about that little comprehensive analysis thing I said, it also completely disregards the fact that quite often, from the person's point of view, their feelings, at least, about what's going on in their life are very legitimate. How they're acting on them is a different thing, yet we almost always focus only on the actions. And so you get, I don't, as I indicated earlier, I don't have an argument with that sequence of events as far as being the truth. I mean, it's not like I'm trying to invalidate teaching principle. It's true. You let a little girl get out of a place she doesn't like, because she throws up, she will learn to throw up. If you never let her out again, when she throws up, she will stop throwing up. But it's a much more interesting question to ask, why would she want to get out of here? What are we doing? And what could we do so she won't want to? And just because 29 other kids aren't, it doesn't really matter. Same thing with respect to Ralph yells and hits. Why does he do that? Well, what do you do when he yells and hits? I yell back. I ask him to stop. I restrain him. I leave him alone. Behavior analysis, limited behavior analysis, would have you conclude, well, we've been paying a lot of attention to aggressive behavior. We've been allowing escape. How can we set it up so that won't happen? Well, the thing that's really interesting is, remember I said a lot of the programs we find ourselves being involved in don't have a chance of working? One of the reasons a lot of them don't work is you can't carry them out. They're not even being carried out. Anybody want to work with Merle and guarantee me that you will be able to arrange an environment so that you don't have to attend to his aggressive behavior, and his aggressive behavior will never result in escape? I couldn't. If Merle came in, if I put some work down in front of Merle and Merle took it, threw it in the face at me, I handed it back to him again, he started coming to me with his fist balled up, I think I'd run. But you're rewarding aggression. Sure I am. Over and over and over, we see behavior programs that on paper, PERT charted, if carried out, would result in not very much attention to inappropriate behavior and no escape until you plug in the real world, and then it all comes apart at the seams. The girl is working with a guy, and he's working away, and now he's kind of getting bored, and he starts whining and fidgeting and complaining, and he can't talk, but it's his way of saying, I'd rather not do this, could we take a break? And you watch, and the girl ignores it, and then later you ask her, why did you ignore him? Did you understand what he was doing? Oh yes, he wanted to quit, but we have to work for 45 minutes. Why didn't you let him take a break? That would have been rewarding whining and fidgeting. You come back in an hour, and that girl and two men are on top of him on the floor. Look, just bit her. That's an interesting program that says it is better to avoid minor reinforcement of a kind of a fidgety, whiny behavior in order later to get to pay a lot of attention to aggressive behavior. And a lot of times that is exactly what happens. Because I don't know how many times I've walked up to staff and said, could you carry out this program? And they say, no. But that's what they told us to do. But of course we don't. He hits me and I walk away. But you're not, or you're not supposed to attend. I have to do this. So a lot of people would say the solution is ignore, interrupt, redirect, and reinforce. And if that doesn't work, go to timeout. If that doesn't work, go to... And I would do those things too after I had worked for a long time on asking, why would he be so frustrated and angry and confused or what? That he finds life is better when he's angry instead of when he's not. I'm interested in figuring out why it is that Ralph's life gets better when he hits, rather than simply trying to make sure it doesn't by some kind of plan that we can't carry out. What is it we're doing or not doing with him that would result in his finding out that things are bad and they get better when I get aggressive? And that's where the meeting the person's needs play a part, but it all gets balled up also with good teaching. And so we don't have a lot of time this afternoon, but that's not what you do as much of. I don't want to de-emphasize the role of good teaching, and to the extent that you can monitor that and look at it and advise about it, because the state of teaching in most situations is a bad, bad one. We have taken to now spending more time on hands-on teaching because we neglected it too much. And I'm sad because we did neglect it too much. We have not given the people the hands-on skills they need. Recently, we've started going and meet with people, and they pick somebody that they have difficulty with hands-on teaching stuff with. And we ask them, videotape yourself working with the person. And then before we ever look at the videotape, we say, who is this person? And what are you trying to accomplish in this teaching situation? And then people tell us about the person and what they're trying to accomplish. And we write it on a piece of paper. And then we watch 10 minutes of videotape. And the teacher is usually 5 different shades of red by the end of that. And themselves, without anybody saying anything, they say, I didn't know I did that stuff. I'm not doing anything like I said I was. I'm not accomplishing what I said I was. I just throw out some of the most important stuff because I don't want to forget. It's not at all unusual for us to find the instructor going to sleep in front of the person. Figuratively going to sleep. There's a real confusion here about what's trying to be accomplished. This may not hold water because we just started talking about it. It makes sense, but I don't know if it really does. Saying it to you will sound like it does. It's important for me to ask the teacher, and I mean by teacher, group home person, sheltered workshop supervisor. I want to know from the teacher what you're trying to accomplish. And I want to put it in roughly in one of 3 boxes. The first box is, I want you to tell me whether you're trying to build a relationship with this person. These aren't all mutually exclusive, by the way, but. Or secondly, you say, I've got a good working relationship with the person. They know me, I know them, they trust me. I'm trying to teach the person that it's fun, interesting, or productive to work with me. Many parents have a terrific relationship with their kid, but their kid knows if mother sits me down at the table and we start doing a task, I'm going to hate it and she's going to yell and scream. Thirdly, I'm not trying to build a relationship. The person has a history of it's fun to work with me. I'm trying to teach this particular skill. Those aren't mutually exclusive, but they are enough exclusive that you got to think about all 3. Last time I was in your fine state, a young woman ruined the day for me, almost. And I don't blame her at all. But she really did. She sat through the day, and she said at the end, I'm disappointed because I wanted a practical answer to this problem and I didn't get it. I'm trying to teach a man to sand and he hurts me. What can I do about that? And I said, could you tell me more about it? And she said, well, I'm working with this guy that just came out of the institution. And I work at a workshop and I'm trying to teach him to sand. But if I sit by him to do anything, much less sand, he hits, he scratches, and he tries to run away. I said, tell me more about your objective. And she said, well, I can't remember it exactly. It's like 30 minutes of sanding without, she was trying to remember how to play. And I failed in an attempt to try to get that woman to ask herself, why would I say to somebody else my objective in working with a man that won't sit by anybody? Much less 20 minutes, much less sand. My objective is to teach him to move a rough piece of paper over a board for 20 minutes. She wanted the solution to that. I wanted to get her to reframe it and say, my problem is I don't have a relationship with this man at all. Much less he has no history of me sitting with him is productive, interesting, or fun. And thirdly, he probably knows how to sand anyway, and it isn't a skill to teach him because he already has it. But she wouldn't back off of, in the plan it says I'm supposed to teach him to sand, so give me the answer. If there's nothing more important that I would say today, I think you need to think about that, and you need to say, for the really toughest people like Merle, the teacher here, Merle, has no relationship with Merle. Merle has no history that it's fun to be even around the teacher, and bizarrely, there's no skill to teach because Merle knows how to do everything he's being asked to do. And lo and behold, guess what? When those other 2 things are missing, the relationship and a history of any kind of fun or interest, the entire plan becomes compliant. How many people do you work with where the entire plan is something they can already do and the objective is to get them to do it longer or more reliably? That's not irrelevant. I mean, it's not a stupid thing to be doing. But let's don't confuse that. Let's don't call it skill training. Let's say this is a behavior management plan that's very comprehensive. It's a compliance plan. So, if I was working with Merle, I would say if I don't have a relationship with him, I'm going to try to establish one. And the first thing I'd have to ask myself, is this the right place to do it? How successful was I when I was single? How successful was it as a party to go up to a woman that I was attracted with and say, hi, what bores, frustrates, and confuses you? Let's do it together, get to know each other. How many times do we meet handicapped people that way? Hi, I'm Dr. Payne. How many handicapped people have a history of an adult that's not handicapped walks up to them, fun things are going to happen? Not many. Beyond the ludicrous stuff of, if you don't think about all that stuff, you often even end up giving people things to do that cause the problem themselves. We've had a number of people kicked out of programs because they swallow things. And then they're given small assembly tasks in the workshop instead of watermelons to sort. I mean, seriously. I've also begun to believe, I must really be getting old because I'm beginning to say all the things my father told me. There's a whole big role for common sense in this that goes out the window because of policies. I mean, like you were supposed to assemble ballpoint pens even though you swallow anything small enough to put in your mouth. And you know, my mother would say, why did you give him something that small? I mean, it really is. There's this common sense and practical stuff. Teachers that give kids, I saw a teacher trying to get a kid to take a toy car that rolled, and then there was a toy truck that the car would fit in, the back of. And she was going to teach insertion as a task. I don't know why, but she was going to teach that. And she'd give the kid the car, and he'd just go on the road, just all over, and she'd point to the truck, And you think, why would you give a kid a toy that is made to roll and to play with, and give him that, and ask him to do something totally unnatural with it? Especially since she shouldn't have been trying to teach insertion anyway. She shouldn't have even been trying to just focus on fun stuff. She had no relationship at all with this kid, and he was kind of scared over and real distancing. Why would you give anything to a kid that you're going to have to interrupt him a lot and say no? You're not going to be able to be positive. His mother, when she started working with him, provided 58 prompts: start, stop, or change. 58 prompts in a row without a positive feedback, because she had given him something far too difficult to do that he found something else to do about, and so she just found herself saying, no, not that. You don't do it that way. Here, let me. No, not enough. Here, come back. 58 times. And then finally he did something, and she said, good. And then the insanity of it is, she is going to come to me and say, I don't know why he acts that way. There's a little boy named Jan Terry, in Kentucky, who gets a 50-minute school day, counting from when he gets on the bus till he gets off. It only takes 5 minutes to get to school, so he has a 40-minute school day, and somebody had the nerve to tell me, but it was quality time. I was asked to go down because he was said to be terrorizing his school. They have a plexiglass shield for the bus driver. The bus driver gets inside the plexiglass shield. John Terry's the only kid on the bus, and he is shackled to his seat, which he loves. They let him out of his shackles at the school. He goes through 4 teachers in 40 minutes. They do speech, they do homeroom, everything, and he's gone. They told him to stop, start, or change. In 32 minutes, that's the only time I could take data. He was running away part of the time, and I couldn't tell what they were doing. But in 32 minutes, they told him to stop, start, or change 360 times. Now, some of that was quite reasonable. It was. Show him something, say, what's that? But about 80 to 90